Good evening and welcome. My name is Byron Abston. I'm the Associate Dean for Advancement at Shelton State Community College. It has been my honor and privilege to serve on the Realizing the Dream Committee along with colleagues from Stillman College, the University of Alabama, and Shelton State Community College. In addition to these wonderful institutions of higher learning, the Tuscaloosa chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference has also been a valued member of the Realizing the Dream series and joins us to host our 8th annual Legacy Banquet. Tonight is a time for reflecting upon our past, celebrating our present, and eagerly looking forward to our future. I would like to ask that you please follow along with your printed program. And again, thank you for coming and enjoy your evening.
Good evening. My name is Linda Beto, and it is one of my greatest privileges to serve as a member of the Realizing the Dream Committee. Last year, we adopted our theme, Through the Strength to Love, based on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s principles, the special strength that it takes to show love in all situations. This year's theme, Realizing the Dream through the Inherent Worth and Dignity of Every Person, is intended to focus on the rights that each of us is granted as members of the human race. This principle ensures that we all reach our full potential as human beings, as well as we all contribute to our well-being, the well-being of others, and the well-being of the universe. This principle was also highlighted in Dr. King's April 16, 1963, letter from the Birmingham jail, in which he states, "In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality," the end of his quote. In Dr. King's acceptance of the 1964 Nobel Peace Prize, he remarks that sooner or later, all of the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together in peace. Perhaps no two human beings in modern times better personify this year's Realizing the Dream theme than the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929, and President Nelson Mandela, born in Mavezo, South Africa in 1918. Add to the common themes of their work, the philosophical mentor both held in common, Mahatma Gandhi, born in Porbandar, British India in 1869, and you have a clearer understanding of the influence these two giants of freedom and equality had on world events. Dr. King believed that by reaching into ourselves and tapping our transcendent moral ethic of love, we could overcome. Love, truth, and the courage to do what is right should be our own guidepost in this lifelong journey. This is from the foreword by Coretta Scott King. Our committee works hard to create programs that celebrate the good work that has been done and the hard work that remains ahead to create the vision of social justice that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. framed for us during his lifetime. That vision has helped to transform society. 50 years ago, having a room like this, filled with such a diverse gathering of allies in Tuscaloosa, would have never been possible. Nevertheless, discrimination still exists in both overt and covert ways. Discrimination is based on race, gender, sexual orientation, nationality, religious background, and political beliefs, takes place both out in the open and behind closed doors. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go before the Dr. Martin Luther King's dream really is fully realized. Dr. King said in 1963, in his letter from the Birmingham City Jail, "We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men and women willing to be co-workers with God." These words still ring true in our community, and we are here tonight to honor 3 individuals who embody Dr. King's vision of tireless efforts and persistent work toward human progress. It is now my pleasure to introduce the University of Alabama Jazz Standards Combo featuring University of Alabama students majoring in jazz under the direction of Professor Christopher Kozak. Please join me in welcoming this talented group.
May we pray. Almighty God, we bless your name. For you forgive us from all of our iniquities. You redeem us from a life of destruction. You crown us with steadfast love and mercy. You satisfy us with all good things. You are clothed with splendor and majesty. How manifold are your works. We acknowledge you as Redeemer, Ruler, and Reconciler. We have gathered here again for this purpose, a diverse and different, and people who are different in our passions, our powers, and our purposes in life, to commemorate the life of your servant, Martin King. As we share this night together, under the light of your love, may it be our resolve to embody the principles and the ethics of which he stood and ultimately died. Grant our speaker grace sufficient to deliver that which he has prepared. Arrest our attention. Open our hearts to receive it. Bless the food and the hands that have prepared it. As we partake of this bread, may we be mindful that you are the bread of life, and it is you who sustain us in strength and weakness. May all we do tonight be a sweet offering to you for your glory and your glory alone. In the name of Jesus we pray, amen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you will go ahead and continue to eat, but we do need to get going on the program. So it is my pleasure. I'm Ed Mullins. I work with Dr. Pruitt in the Center for Community-Based Partnerships, and I'm a former dean of the College of Communication and Information Sciences. They put me out to pasture, and I found a good pasture in Dr. Pruitt's office. We are indeed fortunate to have as our guest speaker tonight Doug Jones. I will call him Doug because I'm familiar with the other Doug Jones. He and I were deans together for many years, and he mentioned the other Doug Jones as being one of his mentors when he was a student here. Our speaker tonight is a well-known civil rights hero. He is especially remembered for his work as prosecutor of the 16th Street civil rights bombing. But everyone remembers that, but did you know he was the prosecutor in the Eric Rudolph bombing of the Women's Center in Birmingham, in which a police officer died, and Mr. Rudolph received a life sentence. He is active and still working in law with the Jones and Hawley law firm in Birmingham. He lectures across the country and is still interested in the civil rights movement, and he finds interest in the civil rights movement everywhere he goes, among churches, civic groups, and the like. His signature cause, of course, was the civil rights case, but he has prosecuted many other cases in his career as a U.S. attorney, in which he also worked in Washington with his late Senator Howell Heflin. He is on the board of the Civil Rights Institute, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, as a vice president, which is one of the most exciting and frequented venues of any in the state, up to 150,000 visitors each year. Doug Jones entered UA in the fall of '72, majored in political science. He came to school at the time of the first African-American athletes on the various athletic teams. His hometown is in Fairfield, and it is an honor for us to have as our guest the 1976 graduate of the University of Alabama, the '79 graduate of Cumberland Law School in Sanford, the U.S. attorney, who, as I said, who reopened the case and got prosecutions of the 16th Street Baptist Church. In recognition of his civil rights work, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute awarded Jones the 15th Anniversary Civil Rights Distinguished Service Award. It is my pleasure now to bring to the podium our guest speaker for tonight, G. Douglas Jones.
Thank you, Dr. Mullins. I appreciate that very much. President Bell and President Anthony and President Millett, thank you for having me. This is a real honor tonight to be here with you. It is especially an honor. You know, before we were coming down here, and I really appreciate all you being here, because before we were coming down here, we were watching television and the news, and they announced that the national championship trophy was going to be on display, and you can have your picture made with it at Target. And my lovely wife, Louise, who's here with me tonight, looked at me and she said, "Oh, Lord, Doug, nobody's going to show up." Which was really her polite way of saying, "I'd rather have something else to do in Tuscaloosa tonight, Doug." I would like to mention one regret that I have here tonight, and that is that some dear friends are not able to be here. Many of you may have known Becky and Melford Espy, who were longtime and dear friends of mine. They both passed away a few years ago. Becky taught me social studies in the 7th grade, and Mel was a counselor in high school, and then down here when I was a student. And I owe them a lot, and I miss them. And I know if they had been able to be here tonight, they would be here on the front row, beaming proudly of someone they helped raise back in Fairfield, Alabama. I'm also especially glad to be here tonight, though, because you're honoring one of my dear friends and heroes, Bill Baxley. You'll hear more about Baxley, but truly in 1970, when I was just 16 and he was only 28 years old, he was elected as Alabama's Attorney General. And I am absolutely convinced that in 1978, if this state had saw fit to elect him governor, we would have been a far different state over the years than we are today. I do quickly want to make one correction in your program, though, because the program says that Bill is best known for this work prosecuting the Chambliss case, which was the other 16th Street bombing case. He's actually known very well for that, but what he's best known for is something that is connected to the case. You see, when Bill he was a great politician when he was in office, and he used to get all this mail, and he would answer all his mail. But during the investigation and trial of that case, he got a lot of hate mail. You can imagine in the early 70s the kind of hate mail that came forward to his office. One in particular came in from a guy named Edwin Fields, who was the National States' Rights Party president from Atlanta. And Bill showed me a copy of it. It was awful. I mean, it was a 3-page just diatribe about how bad an individual Bill Baxley is. Called him everything under the sun, even including a disgrace to his race for prosecuting these good white Anglo-Saxon Christian men. But Bill, like all the great politicians, responds to his letters. And this is really what he's best known for, because in response to that letter, he just simply wrote, "Dear Dr. Fields, per your letter, in response to your letter of February 10th, kiss my ass." True story, folks, true story. Bill and I travel together a lot. Bill and I travel together a lot, talking about the prosecutions of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing cases. And since those cases, I have been fortunate enough not only to travel with Bill, but to also travel alone throughout the state, throughout the country lecturing on those cases and the history that was behind them. And I'm always fascinated, Dr. Mullins and I were talking about this a moment ago, to see how important it is for people to learn about what happened in Birmingham in 1963 and how we came to prosecute 2 former Klansmen almost 40 years later. Folks seem to want to touch a piece of history, which I truly believe is a history that is not adequately taught in our schools today. You see, people know the big picture. They know the events. They know about Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. They know and have heard about the Freedom Riders in 1961. They know about the Children's March and the fire hoses and the dogs in 1963, and the stand in the schoolhouse door in Tuscaloosa, the March on Washington, and yes, the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. But for my legal team as prosecutors, we had to connect all those events, connect the dots, if you will, to explain why it came to pass that the 16th Street Baptist Church was targeted for a Klan bomb, and maybe even children targeted for death. So let me explain just briefly about that. You see, in 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education decision declared separate schools or unequal schools, and that schools should desegregate with all deliberate speed. And I don't have to tell you the history of the separate but equal doctrine in the schools in this country. Well, that didn't happen. It didn't happen with all deliberate speed. It took decades. And in 1957, Fred Shuttlesworth decided he was going to enroll his children in an all-black high school in Birmingham. But he was met with a mob of white people and beaten. He and his wife both beaten, chased up and down the sidewalks. One of the people in that crowd was an individual named Bobby Cherry. He felt so compelled to violence to stop school desegregation that he would beat a man of the cloth, a man of faith, Fred Shuttlesworth. Then you have the 1961 Freedom Riders, and Bull Connor keeps the Klan, allows the Klan to have their way with the Freedom Riders. Police officers didn't show up at the Greyhound bus station for some 20 minutes. But because of what happened to the Freedom Riders, Birmingham business leaders decided to change the form of government. And it took them a while to get it changed, but all of a sudden in the fall of 1962, the Birmingham City government changed from a 3-member commission that included Bull Connor to a mayor and city council. So they had an election. But at the same time, Reverend Shuttlesworth was in Atlanta talking to Dr. King to come to Birmingham to desegregate the most segregated city in America. And the children's marches took place just after the election. Bull Connor lost the mayor's race, but he stayed in office. When all of the marches settled, and you've seen the pictures of the fire hoses and the dogs and the kids streaming out of the schools to participate, when that was resolved with a very modest settlement to change Birmingham, Klan was not happy. And they did what the Klan only knew how to respond, and that was with violence. A.D. King's house was bombed shortly thereafter. The Klan was seeing their segregated way of life sliding away, and they didn't like it. In the children's marches, it wasn't just the children who were the symbols of the movement, but the 16th Street Baptist Church, because that's where they would meet. So now the Klan was unhappy, and guess what? The 16th Street Baptist Church and the children were the symbols of the movement. The stand in the schoolhouse door made them angrier. They never dreamed that George Wallace would actually step aside. They didn't know that it was just a charade, all staged for his political career. Later that summer, bombs continued to blow up in Birmingham. Arthur Shore's home was bombed twice. In August, I have a dream speech, and everyone thought that things were looking up. It was a positive atmosphere, but in Birmingham, the desegregation of the Birmingham city schools was about to take place. Court ordered desegregation of Birmingham city schools. And 5 days before the bombing of the church, young men and women walked into elementary and junior high schools to desegregate the Birmingham schools for the first time. And Birmingham was on edge. The city schools, because so much violence had over the years has occurred as a result of school desegregation. So I don't think it was a coincidence that 5 days later, when the marquee outside the church was advertising a youth worship service. The target, the youth of the children, and the children were coming to that church together again. That's the weekend that it was targeted for a bombing. And so the jury understood it. The jury got it. And it's only by connecting the dots of history that people come to fully understand what has happened in this state and in this country. It's only by connecting the dots today that we can measure how far we have come as a society, how far we have come to realize Dr. King's dream that he so eloquently talked about on the Mall in Washington. Now, certainly, as has been discussed earlier, we have made enormous strides in race relations and equality, in civil rights, and in human rights. Legally mandated racial segregation in Alabama and the South has been dismantled. Legally mandated racial segregation has been dismantled. The field of education has seen huge improvements. While just under 26% of black adults aged 25 or older had completed 4 years of high school in 1964, the percentage had increased to 85% by 2012. The number of African American college undergraduates has increased tenfold since 1964. Infant mortality in the black community has dropped dramatically, although I think we still have a ways to go in Alabama. African Americans have come to occupy positions of power and influence from the boardrooms to the State House to the White House. But it's very easy, and especially at events like this, to talk about how far we've come, to mix and mingle and pose for pictures and celebrate, and we should celebrate, congratulate ourselves on our success. But it's real easy to never have the conversations truly that we must have about race in this country. Never even trying to connect the dots about what is happening in this state and in this country that is eroding the true fulfillment of Dr. King's dream. A few years ago, I was struck by the final passages of an editorial by the Anniston Star following the death of Bobby Frank Cherry, one of the individuals I prosecuted. He died in an Alabama prison where he had been incarcerated since the conviction. The Star wrote that Cherry represented the banality of evil in a time when it was more common than we like to admit. It is easy to look back on those times and see that the militant racial hatred that consumed him had no place in a civil society then, and certainly does not now. It's much more difficult to confront the shadows of racism and prejudice that surround us in the present. It comes in subtle forms. There's rarely a fuse that gets lit. It's more of a slow burn. But make no mistake, its flames are just as consuming as those that raged inside Bobby Frank Cherry. You know, like so many Americans, I believe that with the election of Barack Obama, we had finally moved past so much of our racial divides. Not necessarily a completely post-racial world or whatever that term is, but we have really moved beyond having race so prominent in our everyday lives. Not that we had eliminated racism, but that race would not be as dominant a factor as it had been, at least in my lifetime. I remember a really remarkable occasion the night of election in 2008. I'd gone to the Boutwell Auditorium in Birmingham, which was the site of a beating of Nat King Cole in the 50s. It was the site of the Dixiecrat Convention in 1948. But on that night in November, it was the site of a victory party with the election of Barack Obama. And it was a raucous occasion, to say the least. And I stayed and I enjoyed it, and it was awesome to go. And as I'm walking, as I'm leaving and the party's still going on, I walk across the street and I meet a friend that I'd known for a while who's been around in Alabama politics a long time, Billy Joe Camp. And I talked to Billy Joe, and we talked about that night and how excited it was. And I said, well, I got to go. I'm going to another party. And I walked away, and as I walked away, I turned because it struck me as he walked toward that party that I was just watching the former press secretary to the late Governor George Wallace going to a victory party for the first black president of the United States. So yeah, folks, we've come a long way. But if there is one thing I have learned from Bill Baxley, and it's really a lot more than that, it's just you kind of just tell things like it is. And unfortunately, the election of President Obama appears what I hope to have been a watershed was really simply a high watermark rather than lasting change. Because with his election and since his election, we have seen a consistent and disturbing erosion of civil rights in this country. It is everywhere, and racial bigotry and prejudice are continuing to rise. You all know it. As we sit here tonight, you all know it. It's not necessarily talked about as much as it should be, but it needs to be, and frankly, it is being talked about more. We have economic disparity, and the wealth gap is growing. Our schools tend to be more segregated today than they've ever been in the last 50 years. Law enforcement and the criminal justice system continue to struggle with racial issues and the training. We have seen it all too often in the last couple of years, where unarmed young black men are killed by police. And I'm not trying to diss the police because they do an incredible job, but there's got to be some change. There has got to be some change in the way we do things. The access to the ballot box by minorities is getting harder and harder. Through various state laws, whether it's voter ID laws or others, access to the most fundamental freedom that we have, the freedom to vote, is being challenged every day. And especially in a state like Alabama, where we have a budget crisis, and all of a sudden it seems to be used to close the ID-getting places, the DMVs, in the black belt where Democratic voters happen to be. I promised Louise I wouldn't get too political, so if I do, she'll throw a cheesecake at me, I'm sure. And in the case of Shelby County versus Holder, the Supreme Court of the United States stripped the Voting Rights Act of a critical provision used by the Justice Department to ferret out voting rights abuses before they take effect. And then across college campuses, from one end of the country to the other, minority students are once again finding their voices, are rising up to express their concern and frustration with the racism that they are experiencing on their campuses. Right here in Tuscaloosa, one of your honorees tonight, the second African American to be elected SGA president at the university, has felt compelled to participate in a video to shine a light on the problems that he sees. Now, those problems aren't being taught at the University of Alabama. They're not being condoned at the University of Alabama. They're being brought to the University of Alabama from outside of not just this state, but other places where parents and teachers and ministers are not doing the job of teaching people about justice and truth and reconciliation. Now, the last thing I need to do tonight is to give you some kind of laundry list of things that have happened in this country over the last few years. You instinctively know what I'm talking about the erosion of civil rights and the rise of bigotry. What I hope you will do, not just tonight, but every day, is to connect the dots of what you see and hear going on around you, from Tuscaloosa to Montgomery to Washington, D.C., to see what is happening in Alabama and throughout the country, and connect the dots to what you know in your heart is happening. I believe that the rhetoric of our political figures fans the flames of bigotry and prejudice. We have seen that history in this state. And sometimes in today's world, I think they fan those flames even when they don't intend to. You know, George Wallace never used the N-word in public, but he fanned the flames of hate and bigotry with code words and fear. In those days, the hate was directed toward the black community. and the involvement of the federal government, but in part as a result of our ever-growing diversity in this state and country. Today's rhetoric seems to be directed at a much broader and much more diverse segments of our population. African Americans, Latinos, the LGBT community, Muslims. If you don't look like them, talk like them, or worship like them, a lot of people just hate them. And we got to work on that. We've got to do something. And make no mistake, today's politicians, in my view, are taking a page from the playbooks of the past, in which state leaders continue to resist the growing movement of civil and human rights in the state and this country. You remember from your old civic lessons the terms nullification and interposition used by Southern politicians to attempt to override acts of Congress, the decisions of the United States Supreme Court. Well, today, we have a Chief Justice who believes that his views of morality override decisions of the United States Supreme Court. And he tells probate judges throughout Alabama, just ignore the law. They're wrong, so just ignore them. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a problem. And if you don't think that that's a throwback to the civil rights era, look and compare the two. We, in this state, we're in a fiscal crisis. We've been that way for a couple of years through a lot of reasons. I'm not going to just blame the folks that are in Montgomery now. This has been building up a long time. But even today, we spend thousands, tens of thousands of dollars on legal fees defending an indefensible immigration bill that was simply attempted to override the constitutional authority of the United States government. Now, everyone agrees that our immigration system is badly flawed. But when a sponsor of that bill seems to conflate the term illegals with the term Mexicans, we got a problem. We've got a problem. And at this point, there's just not much need for me to go into the hateful rhetoric we're hearing from Donald Trump. Republicans from one end of the country are doing that for me. You heard it and you've seen it. But I will say this, I am concerned about one aspect after I hear this from some of the political commentators who are talking about Trump's rhetoric. And they seem to, even though they will note the criticism, they then come back and say, well, Mr. Trump seems to be just tapping in to what so many people believe. That it's true that people believe that way. You can only see it in the turnout that he has. That's the sad part. That there are people that actually still believe that and applaud him. You know, our political leaders need to lead. Our political leaders need to be more like Bill Baxley, who took a chance on the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing case in the 1970s, who took a chance cleaning up the environment in Birmingham, going against big business in the 70s when it wasn't popular. Our leaders need to lead. When there are fundamental wrongs in the minds of folks, they need to be the ones to lead the change, not translate it into public policy. Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey, said at the Republican convention a couple of years ago, leaders should not just follow polls. Leaders need to move polls. I wish Governor Christie and the others on that stage would follow his advice. And we need to demand more of our candidates and our elected officials. They need to know that Dr. King's dream is not just for rich white guys in this country. Dr. King's dream encompassed everybody of all races, all religions, all ages, all sexual orientation, you name it. It encompassed everybody. Now, there are a couple of areas specifically that I would like to talk about just briefly that I'm working on that concern me, that I believe are a function of some problems that we've got both in race and just civil rights and civil justice. Areas that I think are desperate for change, in which I also believe that there is some opportunity for bipartisan support. The first is with the payday lending practices in the state. Outrageous interest rates of over 450% in most instances. Think about that. Somebody, you probably got credit cards, you have loans, you got credit cards that you complain about 20%. 450%. That law was changed in 2003 to change the usury laws that allow these people to charge these outrageous rates, make these millions of dollars on the backs of the poor and the working class families in this state. Last year, they started keeping some tabs on these loans. In a 10-week period between August and, I think, November, October, 450,000 of those loans were taken out by your neighbors in the state of Alabama. Think about that. We're a state of about 4 million people. 450,000 of those loans in a 10-week period. And these are not loans for people that are trying to feed a gambling habit or drug habit, or even for emergencies like their car is broken down or their child is sick. These are loans, the studies show, that are taken out by people who are just trying to meet everyday expenses. Now, a bill was introduced, is going to be introduced in the legislature. Again, one was introduced last year that never got the light of day. For the Alabama to end this practice, to cap the interest rates at around 36%, which is still high, but what an improvement if we could do it. So please, contact your state legislators. Contact your representatives. Ask them to do something positive for the poor and the working class folks in this state. And when you do, remember this, and we had a program about this at our church in Birmingham at Canterbury the other day. Remember when you're complaining about the payday lenders. Remember that there are victims of those payday lenders, those people taking out those loans. Because think about it. If 450,000 people have to take out those loans to meet everyday expenses, what does that really say about our state? And what does it say about the leadership in our state who don't seem to care as much for the tired, the poor, the huddled masses? I told them the other night, I want to work hard to knock the payday lending vultures off, but it's kind of like picking off that vulture that's beginning to pick on a wounded rabbit. You can shoot that vulture, but if you walk away from the wounded victim, you really not accomplished an awful lot. So we need to work to make sure we do that. The second area is in the area of criminal justice reform. Recently, I have been working with the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University Law School with about 150 law enforcement leaders and prosecutors from all 50 states, calling for changes in our criminal justice system through an initiative called the Law Enforcement Leaders to Reduce Crime and Incarceration. Today, the most civilized country in the world has the highest rate of imprisonment in the world. The United States has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. We spend $80 billion annually to lock people up. And in so many cases, it's just simply not necessary. Unnecessary incarceration hurts our communities in so many ways. Now, let's make no mistake. I'm all for law and order. I've been a prosecutor at 2 different times in my life. I defend people, but I'm all about the rule of law. I'm all about law and order. But I also know that there is just simply a lot of unnecessary incarceration that put people away and treat them like animals. And when you do that, it hurts the communities by furthering racial disparities. It exacerbates the economic impact and inequality of communities. It fuels recidivism and hinders economic development in communities that need it most. Today, and I know you've heard these statistics, today 1 in 3 black men will end up incarcerated at some point in their life. 60% of prisoners re-entering society face long-term unemployment. With restricted economic opportunities, criminal activities increase. The law enforcement leaders to reduce crime and incarceration have put forth a series of proposals that I hope will be given a good look by law enforcement and state legislators and the members of Congress. I won't go into all of them, but they're talking about engaging communities. We're talking about alternatives to arrest, alternatives to incarceration for nonviolent offenders, not the violent offenders. And I want to make sure, as I said a minute ago about my history, these 150 folks are not some bleeding hearts here. They are tough on crime law enforcement officers who have spent their careers in law enforcement and protecting the communities. And when you are a foot soldier for law enforcement, you learn a lot about what's going on the street. And so these are well reasoned. Being tough on crime and being smart on crime are not incompatible. This morning, as I was getting ready to go to work, I saw the news about the rise in the homicides in Tuscaloosa, something that bothers everyone. And when you're trying to talk about reducing crime through changes in the system, it's hard when you know that there are certain statistics out there that seem to fly in the face of what you're saying. But I will tell you, studies will show that there's not necessarily the same correlation between locking people up and throwing away the key and reducing crime. But what I saw this morning, I thought was important. I saw your police chief on the TVs discussing the rise of the homicides in Tuscaloosa. But rather than simply giving the tough guy law and order speech, he talked about community involvement. He talked about engagement of the community and education of both the community and the leaders of this community. That is exactly the type of approach that can have long-term effects, and you should be proud of your chief for articulating those in the media today. So, ladies and gentlemen, you know, I know our theme is realizing the dream. And so many dreams have been realized, but we have so far to go. For me, I go back to the case that will forever define me. I think it forever defines Bill, because it is more than for us than just simply about history. You know, when a child is killed, scores of other lives are shattered. The loss of those 4 young girls at the church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 2 boys who died later that day from gunfire in Birmingham created a deep crater of remorse in 1963. It woke up the conscience, I think, of America, the conscience of a president, the conscience of a Congress. But around that well of grief, something incredible has grown. Lives have been saved, and countless more, mine among them, have been enriched. The blast at the 16th Street Baptist Church shook us out of a stupor. It was easy to see that things had to change. It was an alarm to warn about the creep of a smothering darkness that only could be repelled by fundamental change in America. I have learned much from the bombing investigation and trials, from people like Bill, from people like Mary Jolly in the back, Cleo, my colleague at Alabama. I've learned a lot about my city in Birmingham, my state, and my country. The law, our people, good and bad, the dangerous absurdity of racial prejudice, and the terrorism facilitated by divisiveness. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was exactly what the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing was, an act of terrorism, before that word was really a part of our vocabulary as it is today. In the years since the trials, I have started to realize that we are repeating many of the same mistakes from a half century ago. Sometimes that connection is only evident if you're prepared to look past the mask of dog whistle politics, the posturing about economics, or expose those hiding behind religion and political bluster. At other times, it hits like a sledgehammer, as with the Charleston church shootings in June of 2015. The Charleston church shootings raised an interesting piece that something I want to share. Because as we've talked about politicians and their words, we know that words have meanings, whether you say it or not. The words have meaning. Well, symbols have meaning too. And it took the deaths of 9 people in a church in Charleston, South Carolina, for people to wake up and realize that the Confederate battle flag has no place in this society. And I want to show you something real quick, and I'm about to wrap up. But I want to show you something. For any of you out there who ever are talking to someone who says, well, I don't necessarily agree with taking down the flag because it's really a symbol of history. It's a symbol of Southern heritage. Well, despite the fact that the heritage is Confederate heritage, which seceded from the United States of America, tell them to call me and let me show them this picture, this advertisement from this magazine called The Thunderbolt. It was the newspaper of the National States' Rights Party run by Bill's pen pal friend, Dr. Fields. On the back, this is in June of 1965, and on the back you can see this. There's an ad where you can order Confederate battle flags. This is 1965, and this is the ad. It says, "Fly the Confederate battle flag." The Confederate flag is no longer a sectional emblem. It is now the symbol of the white race and white supremacy. Fly it on your car and on your house. So folks, this is not new that this has become a symbol of hate. And thank goodness Governor Bentley and others have begun to bring that down. Despite my instincts as a lawyer, somewhat as of a political junkie, to declare that I have the answers for anything, I cannot profess at all to have the absolute remedies for the enormous ills that we see. However, the richest part of those girls who died, their richest part of their gift to me, has been an awakening that has connected me to my own personal prejudice, strengths, and weaknesses. A very humbling reality check. And now an invigorating journey towards a greater self-awareness that might not solve the world's problems, but hopefully won't contribute to them. Indeed, and I've told Bill this in our talks, I feel like I've grown more in the last 15 years than I did in my first 45. Searching for winning solutions to these recurring problems, like most everyone else, politicians, street protesters, blog writers, anonymous internet experts, academics, everyone wants to hit a home run or win a national championship. But perhaps it's more productive to take the long view, exactly the way Coach Saban and the Tide football team did recently. It's the kind of approach that we took in tackling the 4-decade-old cold case of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. I longed for the big hit, the one big thing to put everything in order, to put it to rest. But truth and resolution weren't going to be established that way. The details had to be linked, the dots had to be connected, and the game contested one play at a time, with everyone doing their part until the very end. Power teams like the Crimson Tide realize that excelling at small ball, solid blocking and tackling, accurate pass routes, sticking with your plan, wins the game, not the fluke on the last second heroics. It's not as sexy. It's not necessarily going to produce a fair result every time. But just as we have witnessed, it's an especially useful strategy when the whole team buys into the concept. You're playing for a winning season, not just the glory of an occasional spectacular victory. So in considering this unique moment today, considering our unique moment in history, a time when we can not ignore our past and perhaps tumble backwards toward the abyss, or truly embrace its lessons and take a step away from the lingering dangers. The choice for me is clear. In my personal life, my hopes for this country, my hopes for my family, my children, my grandchildren, my hopes for this country is to play the small ball, get the little things right, and hopefully others, just like everyone in this room, will also join the team. As a team, we can win. As a team, we can defeat the prejudice that we know is going to exist regardless of what we do. That's the goal. And at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We are all in this together, and our state is becoming more diverse. And if we don't remember the lessons of history, we will be doomed to repeat them. So thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. Thank you for this event, for your celebration, and for your courage, and for your look forward to recognize where we are and where we're headed. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you for taking time to share your thoughts with us tonight. It's truly an honor to have you here with us. Your life has been an answer to the call of justice and a testimony to the fact that the arms of justice are long and that time is no firm barrier to their reach. We thank you for being with us tonight. Before we recognize our 2016 Dream Award recipients, let us take a moment to recognize some of the Realizing the Dream founders and past Dream Award honorees. Please stand and be recognized when your name is called. Founders who are with us this evening: Sarah Davis, Mary Jolly, previous Call to Conscience Award winners Dorothy McDade from 2010, Tuscaloosa City Council President Harrison Taylor, 2011, and attorney Cleo Thomas Jr., 2014. Previous Mountaintop awardees: T.W. Linton from 2009. We thank each of you for being with us this evening. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to a very special part of our program. At this time, awards will be given to honor 3 outstanding citizens for their contributions to the community. These individuals epitomize the ideals of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Thanks especially this evening to the efforts of Max Shores and the Center for Public Television and Radio at the University of Alabama for creating this video in which we present these award recipients in their own words.
I think that when you think about making a difference, you don't start off by thinking that I'm going to make a difference. You just do it. I think that you look at people like Dr. King and many great leaders who have been champions in the civil rights movement. They didn't start off, by saying I'm going to be that person for this movement. it just kind of happened upon them, and it spoke to the leadership. And so for me, I'm very honored and fortunate, to be in this position. But it's something that I did because it needed to be done. It's so funny that I'm getting this award for Horizon, because I ran twice before for SGA and a Senate position, but then also for Vice President of Student Affairs. And when I ran for Senate, I didn't know who to go to as a freshman, but I lost that election, and I lost bad, I'm not gonna lie. But I learned from the mistakes, and I looked at myself and I said, Elliot, where do you see yourself next year? Do you want to try it again? And if so, who do I need to contact to be successful? And so I did a lot of history on Alabama and the SGA, and of course I found Cleo's name. And I called him up my sophomore year before I ran. He answered the phone and I said, hey, Mr. Thomas, I'm Elliot Spillers. I want to run for Vice President of Student Affairs. I don't know how to do it, what I need to do to get there, but you won the SGA presidency and I need your wisdom. And he says, I'm so glad that you called me. I'm actually going to be in town, Tuscaloosa, for the Realizing the Dream event, and I want you to come with me. And so he invited me as his guest. I get there and I sit at his table, and we're all sitting there at the dinner table, and he's getting his award. And I just remember, I don't know, it's like an out-of-body experience, just looking at him and what he embodies as far as his wisdom and his guidance and his leadership. And I'm listening to his speech, and I hear him say, we as a university have gotten so far, but I look at the SGA and I see that it's an issue that I have been the only one to get this position. And I'm calling upon, students and people to attain this. And we can do so much more. And that in and of itself was significant, because it showed that 40 years have passed, him being the first black SGA president, and there not even being one after that. I didn't know then that I wanted to run for SGA president, but I think after losing that time and calling him up and feeling so disappointed and saying I lost, you trained me up, I'm sorry, And he said, don't apologize. He said, you worked for your votes, and students weren't forced to vote for you. But they did it because they respect you, because they see the potential that you have as a leader. I said, well, you know what? As a senior, I have nothing else to lose. Why not go big or go home? You don't think about the things that are going to affect you along the way, because you're so ingrained in seeing the vision realized that it doesn't matter. The critics, the people that will judge you, it doesn't matter. All that you care about, all that your vision and you're focused on is seeing the opportunities that are ahead.
This was a generation was willing to stand and give their lives for the cause. For the coming generation, the unborn generation, it wouldn't have to go through with what we had to go through with in our lifetime. we were having mass meetings. That picture of St. Matthew Church right there. As soon as the meeting was over, this man come running into the church asking where was Dr. King. He was standing talking with the group of men, and this man rushed up to us and said, "Don't take him down 14, Highway 14. We said, "Why? What's up?" And he said, "The Klans are down there. They know that Doc is here." He said, "So you better not take him down that way." There was a church being burned north Tuscaloosa. We couldn't take him that way. Down 69 South, the St. Paul Baptist Church was on fire and was burning down. The Klans was setting our churches on fire. To keep him in here, we brought him in this house because this was a rental house, and at the time it was empty. And he was just so tired, he just stretched out on the bed until about 4 o'clock that morning. And we guarded the windows, the doors, all around. Men had guns and all around the house. About 4:30 that morning, we woke him up, and the men drove him down to Highway 80. So he was going into Uniontown and on into Selma and on into Montgomery. Think about people talking about the terrorists now. We know terror. We have been terrorized so much until just a little march like that was not very, very big for us. They came at us. Billy clubs. And you know, I had heard that billy clubs don't hurt. I'm here to tell you they hurt. But I was hit front and back and trying to raise that's why that raising my hand to keep my face shielded as much as I could. But if you saw the picture, if you notice, you didn't hear a sound. There was not a grunt, a groan, a scream. You could only hear billy clubs against flesh. Nobody cried out because we were taught not to. But I know there's so much changes, so many changes, you know. You can't even imagine. You just can't, it's the feeling that you have, you know. It's something about freedom. Freedom. Because, you know, we never did get it all yet. We haven't got here yet. We've got miles to go before we sleep. As Robert Frost says that, but it's true. Miles to go before we sleep.
I don't think that I ought to be mentioned in the same paragraph as Dr. King, because he was a true hero, and what he did, what I did, mine is a speck compared to the courage he showed and what he did. And but he was somebody that I looked up to most all of my adult life since I was a teenager, since the bus boycotts. shortly after I took office, I made the decision to reopen that case. In fact, the night before I was sworn in, they had issued me a commission and a badge and a lot of other things, including a little card that you'd carry around in your wallet. And so I took that card, and in the four corners of that card, I put one of those little girls' names in each corner because I knew I'd be looking at that card quite frequently. And I wanted to be reminded that I didn't want to leave office without doing something for those little girls that had been killed. This case had gone to trial in the 60s. He never would have been convicted. At that time, there were a couple of brave people that took a couple of them to trial, and they had written confessions. And the juries at the time were all male, all white, and they would turn people loose in Mississippi and Alabama and in the Deep South, even though they had written confessions, signed confessions. So in one way, we were fortunate that it didn't go to trial back then. You know, people seem to want to hear a story like what happened to Saul on the way to the road to Damascus when he became St. Paul. I had some vision, but that didn't happen to me. I always felt the way I did, and I try to figure out why. I think it must have been a combination of the fact that my parents were good people and taught us to treat people decently, but mainly what I learned at Sunday school and church. And I could never reconcile going to the Methodist church I went to, and we'd get little pamphlets and sing songs. Jesus loves the little children, all the little children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. And then you walk out on the street, and it wasn't like that. And I'd ask my parents why, and they never could give us a good answer, why people were treated the way they were because of the color of their skin. And of course I realized many years later the reason my parents couldn't give me a good answer is because there was no good answers to why people were treated like that. Well, there is no question that we have made great strides. From the time I was in college to now, it's like being on a different planet. Nobody would have dreamed that we'd be as far as we are. But we still have got a long ways to go. Don't kid yourself. The opportunities for the average black child that's born now are not as wide open as for the average white child. And a lot of people don't want to realize that, don't want to face up to that. A lot of white people don't want to admit that, but it's absolutely true. And the overcoming the obstacles that still remain, although we've made great progress, I think it's going to be harder work than what was accomplished to get us where we are now. Because what was accomplished to get us where we are now could be done by court decisions and enforced by people in office that would live up to their oath of office and enforce the law. And that was done. Now that is a lot easier than changing people's hearts and perceptions and getting them to understand the reality that we still have a long ways to go to make it truly equal. And that's going to be not as glamorous and not as easy, but it's something that we got to continue to work at.
At this time, we'd like to invite the president of the local chapter of the SCLC, Reverend Tyshawn Gardner, University of Alabama President Dr. Stuart Bell, Shelton State President Dr. Cynthia Anthony, and Stillman College President Dr. Peter Millett to please come forward to be part of the award presentations.
The annual Realizing the Dream Horizon Award recognizes a young person who demonstrates outstanding vision and hope in promoting social justice, equality, and peace. And as a moment of personal privilege, I want to thank this young man for calling me and all of us at the University of Alabama to be all that we ought to be. Please join me in recognizing the 2016 Horizon Award recipient, Mr. Elliot Spillers. The annual Realizing the Dream called a Conscience Award is presented to an individual in the community who has demonstrated outstanding leadership and courage to help establish social justice, equality, and peace. Please join me in recognizing the 2016 Call to Conscience Award recipient, Ms. Teresa Burrows.
The annual Realizing the Dream Mountaintop Award is presented to an individual who has demonstrated a lifetime of commitment to the dream, and in so doing has furthered the cause of social justice, equality, and peace. We are happy to award the 2016 Realizing the Dream Mountaintop Award to Mr. William Baxley.
It's been a wonderful night. And as Elizabeth Taylor told her 8 husbands, I will not hold you long. So, on behalf of the Realizing the Dream Committee, I want to recognize several individuals, and I ask that you would stand when I call your name. First, I would like to recognize the presidents of the 4 institutions that have worked together to make tonight a success. I will begin by recognizing Dr. Stuart Bell, president of the University of Alabama. Dr. Cynthia Anthony, interim president of Shelton State Community College. Dr. Peter Millett, president of Stillman College. I also recognize the Tuscaloosa chapter of the SCLC, beginning with its past president, Reverend Roy Ferguson, who is the pastor of St. John Baptist Church. Reverend Ferguson helped create this event back in 2009. Now I would also like to recognize the newly elected president of the SCLC, Reverend Tyshawn Gardner, pastor of Plum Grove Baptist Church. The Martin Luther King Jr. Realizing the Dream Committee exists to promote human equality, peace, and social justice by creating educational and cultural opportunities for growth, empowerment, and social change so that every person may experience the bounty of life's abundant possibilities. Now I would recognize the members of this committee, beginning with the chair of the committee, who is the Vice President of Community Affairs at the University of Alabama, and that is Dr. Samori Pruitt. Other committee members, would you please stand when I call your name? Byron Abston from Shelton State Community College. Carol Lagomo, the University of Alabama. Linda Beto, Stillman College. The Reverend Tyshawn Gardner again. Greg Jackson, Tuscaloosa City Schools. Mark McCormick, Stillman College. Oots McKnight, the University of Alabama. Lane McClellan, the University of Alabama. Eva Owens, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Norquinta Reeves, Shelton State Community College. Greg Singleton, the University of Alabama. And Charles Skip Sneed, the University of Alabama. Finally, I say thank you to Attorney Doug Jones and to all of the award recipients. You may applaud again. Attorney Jones and the award recipients remind me of the scripture in Jeremiah that says he had a fire shut up in his bones. And we thank God that they expressed that fire in working for justice. Thanks to everyone for your presence and your participation. Have a wonderful night.